Welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Connecting to Care, Addressing Barriers for Trans Survivors. Thank you for being here. My name's Emil. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a program manager at Forge. I'll be the main trainer today. Michael is going to be joining for some of the discussion, as well as Caleb. And Michael and Caleb are both available in the chat too. So if you have any technical difficulty, or any other questions, just please use the chat as much as you'd like. We love to engage with folks there. So we're glad you're here today. We want to welcome everyone to just get settled in whatever way works for you. Thank you for bringing your expertise, your humility, your brilliance, your curiosity, your body and spirit and mind in whatever ways they are showing up for you today. You might be tired or excited. Maybe like me, hoping that it'll finally rain wherever you are. Um, you might be bringing in a lot of stress and anxiety from the world, or you might not be. And we welcome all of those different experiences here in this space. We're Forge. We're a 31-year-old national technical assistance and training provider who focuses on supporting trans survivors and helping service providers of all kinds better support trans and non-binary survivors with a focus on intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and other forms of interpersonal harm. Our work is survivor-centered, trauma-informed, empowerment-based, and culturally responsive. In this picture, it's me and Caleb, what's it called, tabling at a conference. So today we've got kind of a few main pieces that we'll look at. This webinar again is called Connecting to Care. And here we're looking at all sorts of care that trans survivors may want and need. That may be trans affirming healthcare, it may be disability affirming healthcare, it might be mental health care, healing-based services, survivor-specific services, housing, economic support, all sorts of things. We want to kind of ground that in like, what are the attacks? Why are there so many barriers to trans survivors getting the support they want and need right now? What are some of the tools that exist to help us as trans folks and or as advocates helping support trans folks do risk assessments and safety planning and think about how we can get more knowledge. We'll spend the bulk of our time looking at strategies and resources to increase our own access to care and our community's access to care. And then we'll have a couple kind of discussions in there. We welcome, again, any ideas, input, thoughts, questions in the chat, and we'll get to them as we can. Throughout this, what we're able to offer are options, ideas, experience, and again, a trans affirming trauma informed approach. We don't know everything, so we are also really welcoming a chance to learn together, to share ideas without, having to know all of the answers all of the time. And what we're inviting from you all today is that you participate in the ways that work for you. That could be, again, share in the chat. It could be taking notes. It could be lying on the floor and listening to my soothing voice, or watching the webinar later on. We ask that you show care for yourself and your community throughout this. Again, in whatever ways that looks like. I know I always have a big thing of water with me. Um, it might be snuggling a pet, turning off the lights, whatever you need. And we hope that this is a space where we can all embrace learning and center survivors. So with that, everyone should have the right to the care they want and need. It's kind of a founding principle of the work that Forge does, and why we are gathering here today. Accessing care, again, of any kind of care, should be safe and affirming for everyone. Sadly, we know that that's not always the case, and we'll look at that in a moment. But that's the framework we want for folks and what we're striving for. So I'd love you to just to get folks started chatting with each other. What's something that you found supportive from someone else? It could be something recently, or it could be something anytime in your lifetime, big or small. Uh, Please share in the chat what's something you have found supportive from someone else. Great. First, in the chat, we have sharing a meal during a tough time, someone else being believed. My friend sending pictures of his adorable kids. My gosh, I love pictures of adorable kids. Also with pets, some of my friends send pet pictures back and forth. Being open to each other, my big sister being my rock. Sharing their time, having people who can relate to what you're going through. Awesome. Thank you all. Feel free to keep those coming. Sometimes this can give other people ideas of how we could show care to somebody else or receive care. And I know for me, especially when times are tough, recognizing these ways that I am still getting care, especially if I'm feeling isolated or alone, being able to identify what's really happening, where people are showing up can help me just have a better sense of like what I need and what's happening rather than getting stuck in maybe anxiety or depression about it. So like I said, we are going to look at some of the attacks on trans care. Again, some of this is really specific to trans affirming healthcare or things like that, but those all have a ripple effect on all the ways that trans people interact with the world and get support. So this also impacts trauma-informed care, harm reduction services, all sorts of things like that. As probably most of y'all are familiar with, there are a lot of state and federal laws that have been coming out in the past few years that are attacking trans people's access to public life, to existing, to being safe. This is an example of a map from the Movement Advancement Project, and I'll have their website in just a minute. It's specifically looking at youth care bans and shield laws. So the darker red colors are places where the states are banning best practices for youth care for transgender youth. The kind of pale yellow states don't ban practices. Um, so we kind of are already getting like a scope of a lot of the country is banning what we know is best for trans young people is that they get to make medical decisions in conjunction with their doctors and have access to a full spectrum of care. These laws don't just affect young people, though. They affect providers of adult transgender healthcare. They affect transgender people of all ages. As youth care is banned, medical practices shut down, doctors move to more affirming states, people lose access to care of all ages, and organizations that are providing care might get scared, might stop providing the care that they were or stop advertising it, even if it was still legal for them to provide it. So there's ripple effects there. And this is just one example of state and federal laws. There are many different laws that impact our access to care again. So the bans on youth healthcare, insurance coverage bans, which say, what type of care insurance companies are allowed to cover, even as private organizations. Sometimes those look at just people who have government insurance, so Medicare, Medicaid, or who work state or federal jobs and get their insurance through their workplace, if it's a state workplace. These may also be impacting things like access to reproductive health care, access to mental health care, and what's getting documented by the state. We've seen in some places that there are threats to document who's trans based on, what they're asking their insurance to cover. We're seeing that the government is talking about, and in some instances, collecting data on which employees and their families who are covered by government insurance are trans or have trans people in them. So that creates a real fear for people to use their insurance. And we all know that healthcare is super expensive. So again, there's this like ripple effect that goes beyond just whether or not we have specific medical care, but to all types of things that we might pay for with insurance. Also seeing massive funding cuts. Um, this is happening to mental health services, to domestic and sexual violence programs, to anti-violence support work, community programs, housing, food services, all kinds of the different supports that people need. Some of these are specifically targeting trans people, and some of them are just such broad general cuts that they're going to affect everybody or everybody that needs some financial assistance or needs other types of social services and supports. And of course, we have executive orders that deny the existence of trans people and deny access to services to trans people. Another major barrier that we're looking at of why it's so hard to get care right now is money. Um, Everything just costs way more. I feel like almost every conversation I've been having recently, the fact the rising costs are a major part of it. They are impacting our transportation access, housing costs, again, health insurance or other types of insurance, ability to get groceries to feed ourselves, our families, our pets, to take care of basic needs. And people are having to make a lot of really difficult decisions about what to pay for. And wages and government support are not meeting these financial needs. And wages are not rising to match the cost of living. Government support services like SNAP, which is food stamps or Medicaid or cash assistance programs, are all, being cut and having lots of barriers to care, so people aren't able to get the support they need to make ends meet. This means that people might decide not to drive to their therapist appointment because of the cost of gas to get there, or that they may have to choose between having health insurance that could let them get the type of support and services they want versus health insurance they can afford. So a lot of tough choices are happening across the board. And then, a lot of me talking. Um, Another major factor is that there's increasing violence um, against a lot of different communities, including trans folks. And so one part of that is that as anti-trans systemic violence increases, so does interpersonal violence. This is because that anti-trans policies often empower people to enact interpersonal violence. And the same is true with any form of oppression. We're seeing that anti-immigrant state policies are really empowering people to commit violence against people who are immigrants or they perceive as immigrants. We're seeing a lot of those similarities where state-sanctioned hate increases that violence. And the systemic violence makes it harder for trans people to get safety or accountability. So the systemic violence is impacting that on two levels. We already know that trans people face extreme rates of harassment, hate, and physical violence. If this information is something you're interested about, Forge has a number of other webinars and resources that go much more into that data in depth, looking at hate violence or intimate partner violence, and that you can check out. But study after study shows that trans people are experiencing more rates of these types of violence than cis people. And within that, when there is information about demographics, we're seeing that trans people of color, especially Black and Indigenous people, are experiencing even higher rates of violence. We also hear that not just from studies, but from or not just from academic studies, but from people's lived experiences and what community members share with us, with others, with themselves. And then finally, on increasing violence, the threat of violence can isolate people from community and from services. So people may be avoiding places in order to keep themselves safer, perhaps because there are direct threats against an individual, making it dangerous for them to leave the house, or they live in a place where there's increased violence, increased harassment, or anti-trans policies, give them reason to believe they would be at risk of criminalization or other types of harm if they were out in public. We also, again, systemic violence decreases the amount of safety resources available. So people may be more isolated because there's no longer a domestic or sexual violence agency that they can go to, or the local LGBT center shut down due to loss of funding or, for other reasons. And that further isolates people from community, and community is part of what can help us be safer sometimes. The last thing I have on the list of barriers to talk about, but again, feel free to add things in the chat if there's stuff we've missed that you want to put out there. This isn't a comprehensive list, but this is an overview. Are trauma-related barriers. So as I mentioned, trans and non-binary folks are experiencing higher rates of traumatic events in their lifetime, including violence. And as a response to that, we may be experiencing a number of trauma responses, and we may isolate ourselves again for safety or for emotional well-being and stability. We may have a lot of anger or distrust of other people, which can make it harder to get services or harder to maintain services if we get connected with them, if people don't understand where that anger and distrust is coming from. Um, we may perceive more threats to our safety than there are because of trauma responses that often can put us on edge and seeing danger everywhere and make it difficult to discern what might be safe from what might not be safe. And at the same time, again, there's a lot of places that aren't safe and a lot that are. But and then overwhelm. Trauma responses can lead to just a general sense of overwhelm. They can impact our executive functioning, which relates to, planning, scheduling, remembering what happens, and all of that can have a major impact on getting support. Um, it can make it difficult to understand what somebody's telling you about how you can access a certain service, all sorts of things like that. So there may be internal barriers as well as external ones here. Um, that all felt very doom and gloomy, which I don't know, there's a lot that is really hard and difficult in this world. So if you need to right now, take a breath or shake it out. We are going to talk about some of the small things that we can do in face of all of this. And the first thing I want to touch on is kind of risk assessment or safety tools. It's like, so we might have this big sense that like a lot of bad things are happening. So how can we tell whether we are safe, whether they are potential to happen to us or happening in our area? And how can we make decisions based on that? So the first one is kind of knowing the laws in your area. Equality Federation and the Movement Advancement Project are both excellent resources for tracking state legislation. Uh, and I know what I find often is that during legislative sessions, there's so many proposals that are really scary and really bad. And maybe they pass the House or they get sent to the Senate or all this, you're seeing all these news articles. It can be really overwhelming. So I find that tools like this can be helpful to see what's actually in place now versus, what has been proposed, which even proposals can cause harm. But like if I'm looking at, can I still get this particular drug that I need, or can this organization still provide trans inclusive housing? Like, what law in place now is going to be what matters the most. Other great resources for kind of assessing our own safety, and this is a bit more on the personal safety side, is looking at our technology. As fears about government and private tracking increase, how anti-trans individuals, governments, agencies may be trying to document who is trans and who isn't. Uh, we might want to consider like what we're doing with our technology. At the bottom of the screen, the Electronic Freedom Foundation has a lot of resources around surveillance self-defense and also particularly tips that are for people seeking abortion. But we can still use those tips if we're seeking trans affirming healthcare or anything else that has been criminalized in some places but not in others. So often, abortion related resources can be really helpful because there are so many states in which abortion is being criminalized, but people are still needing to access that care. So there's a number of tech safety documents that look at tools and resources to go to for those. But say you're somewhere with a youth transgender care ban and you want your kid to get care, you might want to read those tips to figure out like how I can keep my technology safe. And some of the biggest takeaways from that are to keep any internet searches, things like that, separate from our regular activity. This may mean using a different device, using a different account, or logging out of your Google account so that it's not connected to like your email, your identifying data, not just not being logged in on things. Use burner devices. Again, those are devices that are not connected to yourself. They're often like pay as you go cell phones or things like that. Um, Turn off location on your devices. Check all of your apps and all of the different ways that location could be on so that you can't be tracked, especially if crossing state lines. And lock, encrypt, and protect things. So having password protection, having additional layers of encryption, using more secure storage thing for any information you may need to store, photos, stuff like that. Each of us will have to make our own choices depending on what kind of care it is that we're trying to access and where we're trying to access on what feels really necessary. And what feels useful. But doing some of those can also take away some of the anxiety and fear about people gathering information about you and dealing with surveillance. And again, resources like EFF are out there for to really talk you through all of the technology steps and things like that. Next up on kind of a risk assessment is like figuring out how good the information we're getting is. There's so much misinformation on the internet these days, and it's just increasing. We see, fake news, fake all sorts of stuff all of the time. I was scrolling the other day and saw like some very realistic looking post about wildfires in a nearby city. And I was like, yeah, we're in a major drought. There's wildfire warnings all the time. Um, but looked it up because I was like, oh, that's where my parents are. Totally fake. So just cross-reference stuff. It's easy to be tricked. Yeah, and as someone says in the chat, whenever and wherever possible, try to find original documents to read for yourself, so you can see what actually is said in things. It's kind of there's a lot of tools about how to assess good and bad information, how to identify AI, all of that out there. the key questions that I generally use are what's the source? What is the bias? Where else can I verify that? And how do I feel about accessing it? Whatever it is I read or learned, what's the impact on me? A little bit more on that. When we're thinking about what is the source of something, again, as mentioned in the chat, like finding an original document can be a way to check out the source. I also often get a lot of news from or information and tips from Instagram. I don't know if you're like me, maybe you scroll Instagram all of the time. And there are different sources. There are going to be folks who have lived experience, who are trans or non-binary survivors. Perhaps they also share another identity with you, a racial identity, disability, other lived experience. They may have really brilliant, insightful things to say that are coming from that lived experience. They may or may not also have additional expertise and training. Some people may be clinical psychologists and are offering information on their understanding of trauma, or a neurobiologist who's talking about how brains function. They have a certain type of expertise, uh, and it can be helpful to think about like what expertise is important to you. Um, Earlier today, I saw somebody who was talking about, how to assess information, and they're like, this information should come from a clinical psychologist. And I disagree. I think there's a lot of value to all of the different ways that people know things, but it can be really helpful to us to understand how and why somebody knows something um, as we're assessing the like how their information can apply to our life. So what a clinical psychologist shares with you may be useful in some ways, but not in others because they only have one set of experience to offer. I think also looking at someone's perspective and what the goal of what they're sharing is. And by that, I mean there's a lot of information about trauma and healing that is maybe trying to help us to fit in with like corporate work standards, how to mask and how to act a certain way in specific environments. And that could be your goal, which means that information is super helpful and great. Um, there's also a lot of information about disability, about trauma, about being trans that's kind of more focused on like opting out of the mainstream system. And if that's our goal, that's super useful. But if you switch them around, they're not going to be useful. So somebody telling you how to thrive in a corporate environment that exists exactly as corporate environments exist right now is not necessarily helpful if that environment is harmful to you and not one that you want to fit into. If that makes sense. The other piece of looking at is kind of the context of the information they're sharing. So now we're looking at like what is being shared. So maybe you read an article on Psychology Today about a particular strategy for managing trauma reminders. One question to ask is like, does this article help me understand the why behind the suggestions? So if the article is just telling you to do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 sense exercise, where it's 5 things I see, 4 things I feel, 3 things I smell. I'm getting this all out of order, etc. That could be helpful. Maybe it's a new tool to you. Maybe you like it. Maybe you don't. But if the article doesn't share why that can help with specific types of trauma reminders, it may not be all that helpful long term because you're less able to adapt the tool to your situation, or to, figure out different tools that could work and like what's happening with your brain. So things that offer you context and kind of explain the methodology behind strategies can be really helpful for that reason. Also, tools or examples or stories that hold complexity are often more helpful. Is there room in whatever you're reading or learning about or access, the video you're watching for both, hard things and good things, for something to not be perfect and not work for everyone? For example, often around trauma or around being survivors, there's a lot of stuff about how strong and resilient and tough survivors are. And those can be really useful, but they also don't always allow us to hold grief, anger, um, being tired, not wanting to have to be tough all the time, all the different ways that we might define strength. So, those, again, we're like kind of assessing, is there space for more than one thing, or is this an all or nothing type of advice? And along with misinformation, there is a rising amount of scams, cults, multi-level marketing schemes, and all sorts of other stuff out there, particularly in the world of wellness. Um, so we can kind of look for a couple warning signs. If somebody's selling something, right? Um, if they're like, listen, we have 100% success. Everyone who goes through this class is healed of their trauma forever and ever, and it's perfect. Here's the $500 class you have to take. Like, there's a few warning signs there. First, that everybody succeeds. There are very few things that have a 100% success rate. And if they do have that, is it because a whole bunch of people couldn't access it? And so they weren't counted as not being successful because they were out of the system. Um, does it blame people? This would work for you if you tried hard enough, if you did it right. If it's not working for you, it's your fault because you whatever. Um, and then do you have to pay a lot of money for it? Um, there are some things that do cost a lot of money because of capitalism. But if somebody's, main goal is making money, that can be a caution sign to look for, is the strategy or approach they have, is it replicable? Are there other places you can access it? What makes this different? Things like that. Um, Another major source of information is from community members, which is awesome. Trans people have been taking care of each other forever, and we will keep doing that. Survivors have been taking care of each other forever. Um, and now there's so many places online that we can access group support. Um, some of those may be more beneficial to us than others. So a few questions that I have when accessing, a community group um, are, well, how do you feel about yourself when you're a part of this group? When you're using this online forum or going to this support group or this meetup or whatever, um, is it helping you to feel more positive, to feel like you're on a path that you want to be on, maybe towards healing, maybe towards whatever? Or do you leave feeling bad about yourself? And if so, is there something happening in the group that's causing that? Is there an idea that there's only one right way to be in the group? I see this, both in survivor support groups sometimes, that like there's an idea that healing has to look a certain way. And sometimes it can be hard for people who, are still in contact with an abuser, and other people in the group criticize them for that without understanding why those reasons might be. Or the idea that, to be trans, you have to follow a certain medical path or dress a certain way or things like that. Um, and people in the group tell you you aren't good enough or you aren't trans enough or you aren't anything enough. Those are all warning signs that, this group um, may not be a good fit or may not be like really supportive and affirming. And again, please add thoughts in the chat, things that you've seen, or ways, that you identify positive supports. And Michael, I'm going to ask you to join me to kind of chat a little bit about this situation.
I am here. Thank you, Emil.
Great. Are you up for reading it, or do you want me to?
My eyes are still dilated from the
Okay, I got
glorious
you.
eye doctor.
Got
So
you.
if you could, that would be super.
So your friend suggested a Reddit forum for trans survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Everything you've read has seemed really helpful and affirming. And after lurking for a couple months, you finally posted something asking for advice. You get three suggestions back from different people. The first is a link to classes on polyvagal theory that a person swears saved their life. The next is someone empathizing with you and saying that they went through something similar, but later they realized it wasn't as bad as they had thought. And the third is a recommendation to get therapy or else you'll turn out like your abuser. Um, so Michael, I want to start with just kind of general reactions to this situation, maybe how you would take some of um, these responses.
Well, it's interesting because one of the first things that I was thinking was that, like, oh my gosh, there's a Reddit forum that talks about, I know this is a made up story, but like we can find support in lots of different places, including on Reddit and on some places that we may not um, tend to think to go to. So that's one of the kind of the positive things. But what we were just saying on the last slide about was like, how does it make you feel when you access something? So when we look at each of these 3 points that you listed out, it's kind of like, well, how does it make me feel when I see these things? And for somebody, it might be very validating to hear, oh, well, it wasn't as bad as they thought. For other people, that might be devastating. So it's like, I think that that core sense of who somebody is and how confident they are, how comfortable they are in their healing, where they are in their process and in their life is going to really shape how they interact with the other people that are there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Um, I specifically wanted it to be a Reddit forum because I think a lot of people, kind of my generation-ish, maybe on either side of me, go to Reddit for advice
Hmm.
all the time. And like, I feel like general service provider consensus is like Reddit is evil and terrible and just a hot mess. Both of those things can be true at the same time, but like there's a lot of really good community support out there. Um, my first response is that all of these responses this person got are like not super great for various reasons. But I really appreciate you saying like, well, it is, how does that person interpret it? What does it help them to think about? So depending who the you in this scenario is, these could have different value. Um, I think they kind of illustrate a lot of the common advice that people get. And that's one of the things that, may be more likely in like an online forum is that you're getting like big chunk of text to big chunk of text. Like, so people's responses may be more advice-like than
Hmm.
um, when you're in a more conversational mode where people might ask one question at a time and offer, simple affirming things. So even just the value of it being a written format can be really
Right.
great for some people and really difficult for some other people.
Yeah, I was thinking too that like I think some people have a kind of a greater level of discernment when they go into a user forum and they're like, oh yeah, everybody that's there, they're just going on about their me kind of framework. And the reader can see that, like, oh yeah, I know that that's not about me, that's about them. And if there's that level of discernment, those things will just kind of roll off their back. They're not going to think about it too much. They're not going to be sad or hurt by it. They're not going to take it personally. That they have to go to therapy. They'll go like, oh yeah, that's that person's thing. I'm just going to take it as what it is. But not everybody's in that place of, feeling really strong about who they are, confident about who they are. Those are not terribly great words either about that, but, being able to kind of separate themselves and their own experiences from somebody else's.
It can vary like
Yeah.
from day to day. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, depending, I could be like 5 minutes apart of reading one of these messages, and 5 minute, the first time I read it, I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. And the next time I read it, I'm like, this is absolutely devastating. This, you know, totally shifts my whole mood. So, um, yes, and to what you're saying.
Exactly right. Exactly. But like, and I think one of the things too that can be interesting about this is like, this person that's the user might have gone like, oh my God, what is polyvagal theory? And then, like you were talking about before, they can go and research that. And they could go, oh, this is something that I want to pursue or that I want to think about. Or it's, hey, no, like I don't want to go there. But it is an introduction to something that they can then check out in ways that may have more validity than a Reddit channel, or may have less lived experience and more academics or whatever it is that they need to feel more certain before pursuing something.
Yeah. And I think that as we get into sort of strategies for like getting and accessing care, that's sort of like it's not all or nothing. Like it's not like this person is 100% right or wrong, but like this suggestion, this idea is a starting point, can be really helpful. Um, and maybe it's a starting point to be like, Psh, I don't need I don't need what they said.
Right.
Um, but can lead us to do additional research to look, to think more about additional things. And it can be a starting point to getting affirmation, even just having a forum to be like, I'm not alone in being trans. I'm not alone in being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I'm not alone in being a trans survivor of this. Can be really meaningful. And then you get to see that, like, yes, we're in this together and we're all different people.
Hmm. And if that's the purpose of what somebody wants there too, is like, I'm feeling affirmed, they can maybe not take all the other stuff in. That's not true for them. So it's again that level of like where is their self versus other and all of that. So yeah, it's really good.
Any last things you want to add on this?
No, it's a great scenario.
Yeah. I will just say, like, for those of us here who do use Reddit or other online forums, like really kind of knowing yourself and what your goals are and what you want to get out of them can be so helpful going in, for all the reasons, yeah, Michael has shared and we've talked about. Great. Okay. Let's make life just like a tiny bit easier for ourselves. One way to do that is by cuddling your cat, um, as shown in this picture here. The strategies we're really going to talk about are planning ahead, going easy on yourself, and sharing information. So throughout these next few slides, I'm kind of thinking about how we either can get access to care or keep care or ask for help or any of those other things that we do, and how we can just take away a little bit of the barriers. Um, I framed it as make life a little easier because for most of us, maybe there's like 20 hoops to jump through to get exactly what we want and need. Um, these strategies might, make the hoops a little bigger so they're easier to jump through, or take away one of them so there's only 19, or lower them to the ground. They make small changes, but it does make it a little easier, and that matters. So first tool here is conversation scripts. Um, that is kind of exactly what it sounds like, where you plan ahead what you're going to say. Um, Stress, trauma, anxiety, overwhelm can all impact our ability to remember what we want to say and to get it out in the moment. So, writing down your goals for an appointment, or even writing down a specific script or phrase of what you want to say, can be really helpful. Um, to do that, you can create just a simple statement of what the problem is, maybe name your biggest goal. And then write down any additional details that feel important. This could be like shorthand, like a little list if that works for you, or it could be the exact phrase you want to say. So you're like, go in and read off of it. As an example, a script might be, I was sexually assaulted and I'm worried about STIs. Can I get tested without a genital exam? That's something you might write down before going into, your primary care doctor or um, any other provider that could provide exams. Another example is talking about dosages of medications. Um, so you might say, I don't think my hormone dosage is right. I would like to change it. And then under that are maybe subpoints that feel important to you. I'm not seeing the effects that I want. I've been on this dose for this amount of time. Or even standards of care suggest that a higher dose would be beneficial. I know you particularly this last one, I've been hearing from a lot of trans women, trans women that doctors are prescribing way lower doses than are actually beneficial and what standards of care would suggest. Another script might be around access. I'm worried that the LGBTQ plus support group will be ended. What is this agency doing to ensure that trans people can keep getting services? Um, any of these, writing down, putting it in your notes app, voice recording it ahead of time, and so that you can just play the voice recording, are all ways that can help you to get that thing out in the moment. If you're working with an agency or an individual that you have written communication with, you can also, communicate that way ahead of time. Sometimes that's easier for our brains for any number of reasons. Scripts can be about, literally anything, and it is absolutely okay. And to have scripted conversations. You don't need to seem spontaneous at the doctor's office or at a sexual assault advocacy meeting or anything like that. Um, and this goes into kind of advocating yourself. We all have the right to advocate for ourselves. Um, you can ask for what you need. You can say what works and what doesn't work. You can request that things change. This may be, really hard to do often. Um, Depending on our relationship to, the idea of like professionals or experts, whether it's a doctor, where we've been told they know what they're doing, or even a domestic violence advocate, who again is in the role of expert, you still have that right to advocate for yourselves and ask what it is. This can be what may feel like smaller stuff, or it could be bigger stuff. For example, you could ask to sit in a different chair in therapy. You could tell a domestic violence advocate that you don't want the door closed. Um, One that I do is I ask doctors' offices to turn off the overhead lights if I'm in a room with windows, because otherwise it's like completely dark. But um, it makes it makes a huge difference for my well-being. If the fluorescents aren't, making my migraines worse. Um, and and that seems so simple on so many levels, right? Can you turn off the lights on your way out? And yet it has taken me a lot of practice, and I don't do it 100% of the time. So while I'm saying advocate for yourself, I also want to acknowledge that this can be hard and can take practice, which is why sometimes we um, write scripts for ourselves, we write things down, we send information in advance to providers, all of that. It's also okay to educate providers. They may be experts in some things, but no one is an expert in everything. So a domestic violence agency may know a lot about domestic violence, but that doesn't mean they know your life. right? They don't know what's happened to you. They don't necessarily know the intersection of your identities and what you need. Um, you might bring in a brochure, a link, a research paper, an additional helpline. Um, Again, there's so many places where people can get help, knowing the, standards of care, asking questions about hormones and other types of trans-affirming care. And there's like an online page where doctors can go and ask questions to other doctors. That I brought in the link to that to a new doctor's office once to be like, hey, so you're kind of hesitant about giving me what I need. Why don't you ask these people your questions instead of just saying no? Um, let's see. In the chat, we have the suggestion. You could also ask that the provider or advocate put this as a flag in your record so you don't have to repeat it every time. That is a great idea. And I'm going to try to remember to do that about the overhead lights because those things suck. Um, it may be, many of us we know trans folks have higher rates of disability. We have, higher rates of violence and trauma. Um, so we may be bringing in additional information about some of those experiences to our provider. And in addition to advocating for yourself, it's okay to ask for help. Um, you could ask a friend to make a phone call for you. Someone could join you at appointments and help you remember things. They could have a copy of your script or your questions. Um, that's something I do with folks before going to appointments, either mine or other people's, to say, like, what are your main goals for this appointment? And we write those down and we make sure those get asked before the appointment ends. Say, did this goal get met? Um, so finding someone to do that with you, sharing research, with other people, with your providers, combining resources, can when we did listening sessions a while back, we heard a story of people in one town that didn't have a trans affirming provider, um, who would all book their appointments back to back, and they would take just like a van load of people to the next town over where the provider was, um, to save them all the transportation costs and also to like just make it fun and less stressful, to go to that doctor. We can also use whatever aids make your life easier. There's a picture of a service dog here. Um, there's unfortunately, a lot of stigma about making our lives easier. We're supposed to like do things the hard way. But like if using a cane makes you a little less tired, use it. If writing things down makes it a little bit less stressful to talk to somebody about sexual violence, do it. That's awesome. If you want to use a voice to text app or text to voice app, do that. But it is great for you to have more ease in your life. We don't have to do things the hard way, unless you want to. And then finally, on making our lives easier is just getting some aftercare. For anyone who's maybe connected to kink communities, and they often talk about aftercare as, after you do something that's like big and potentially emotional or has a lot of feelings, take care of yourself. So, a question to ask is who can you talk to or spend time with, or what can you do after accessing services that can help you get what you need? You might need to debrief, talk it out with somebody, vent, process, complain. You might need to be distracted or to get comfort or to expend energy. Different one, our bodies react in different ways. So sometimes, if assuming, maybe calling a hotline was stressful for you, that may cause you to want to get cozy and sleep, or it may cause you to have a lot of stuff moving around your body. And so You want to go run around the yard with your dog or wrestle with your best friend or something like that. So just thinking about what you need and how you can get it. All right. The next kind of thing we'll talk about is keeping care. So, we're facing a lot of some of us already have access to care and support, whether maybe it's therapy or yoga or a healthcare provider. And all of those barriers we talked about are possibly making it harder to keep that care. So some things that you can do here are, again, share your concerns with the provider. Again, whatever kind of provider it is, they might not be aware of the attacks on trans folks. Um, you're so it's okay to share with them, hey, I live in Florida and this new law passed banning, you know, DEI. How is that impacting your ability to like keep doing what you're doing for me? That might be a question. You can also ask questions about privacy. Are they going anywhere? Are you still going to be able to access the same care in the same way, or any other concerns? With privacy, um, that we see those things change. A lot of providers are going to continue to be bound by certain confidentiality laws or HIPAA or whatever it is. But there are still ways we might be concerned about our privacy and our information. And documentation is a big part of that. So you have the right to ask what's in your records. Whether it's at like a social service agency, an anti-violence agency, a medical provider, some things you might want to check on are, how is your gender and your name listed? Um, does it describe your experiences with violence? Are there diagnoses listed? Are there types of help that you've asked for or needed? And do all of those things match up with what you're comfortable being in there, and the concerns that you have? Um, I used to train domestic violence organizations, and a concern that we had was, what if files get subpoenaed by the abuser? A domestic violence organization, a good one, will fight that subpoena as much as they can and will do everything they can to not share that information. But should it get to court, we never wanted there to be anything in there that could hurt the survivor. Um, you may have concerns similar vein of, what if an abuser, maybe their family member, something like that, gets access to a medical record? What if you're in a state where they're persecuting trans people or people with autism? Do you want that diagnosis listed? And where do you have flexibility to change it or to ask for something different? Who has access to your records, and what can be changed to protect you? And again, it's up to you what feels comfortable. For some people, it's really important that provider has documented that they're trans, so they can get a trans affirming support, so that doctors aren't putting their foot in their mouth all the time. For some people, they don't want that in their medical record, or whatever type of record, because of concerns about privacy, other things like that. So this is again up to you what's going to feel safest. Another thing about keeping access to care is that, sometimes we stockpile resources, and that's been a big concern recently as medications get more expensive, as we lose access to providers who can provide us medications. If you can't get a new prescription for something, you can't get that thing anymore, possibly. So just a couple kind of reminders is that whenever possible, try to avoid cutting back on life-saving medicine and necessary things. Cutting back on insulin can be really, really dangerous, for example. Um, so looking for resources for things that are gonna have a major impact on your health, if you change them or change them drastically or quickly, use harm reduction strategies, try to find other ways to get that medication. Um, pay attention to like medication withdrawal symptoms. Is this something I can stop completely if I run out of, or is it something I need to taper off of? And do I need to plan for that? And be mindful of nationwide shortages. Nationwide shortages of hormones are not trans people's faults by any means at all. They are the fault of capitalism and all sorts of other things. And, we can be mindful that there may be other people who need the medication that we have 20 years supply of in our bathrooms. Like maybe we don't need that much and can share. So just, finding a balance as we stockpile things. All right. Um, and getting new care. So if we lose the care that we have, or we never had care in the first place and we want to get new care, um, I would love to hear from folks in the chat. What are some reliable sources of information that you use to get access to information about care? Again, this could be trans affirming healthcare, it could be anti-violence related care, trauma related care, anything. And who do you go to find support?
Emil, I just wanted to point out this is Caleb from Forge. There's a comment in the chat about how in Florida it sounds like certain training, HIPAA trainings are impacted by legislation about privacy that might, share information about trans youth. So I just wanted to bring that up as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's super scary and concerning. So in Florida, the HIPAA training, it's the exception to HIPAA is other purposes the HHS secretary deems necessary and appropriate. Um, so in a very anti-trans, anti-neurodivergent, anti-people with disability environment, um, there are potentially a lot of exceptions that could just be deemed necessary. So and that's something people may want to take into consideration in their like risk reduction strategies is what's the state attitude? Like um certain things may be more risky in Florida than they are in an affirming state. Sorry, I'm scrolling through that. Okay, share in the chat any reliable sources you use to get information, and I'll keep talking while y'all do that. Um, So one of the ways that we need to get new care is we need to have money for it. Um, to start this, it is completely unfair that money is a barrier to care. Everyone should have access to whatever care they want and need, um, no matter what. Your worth, your value as a human, your dignity, your existence should not be determined by your finances. And it is not. You matter no matter what your finances are. Um, and we live in a world where stuff's expensive, but that doesn't mean you matter less. So it's okay to get creative to get your needs met, right? If you are coming to this through the like advocacy or professional lens, it is okay to support people who are being creative about getting their needs met. That might mean crowdfunding. That might mean using financial assistance programs, whether they're government programs, social services, um, or grassroots mutual aid programs. Um, the Trans Lifeline, for example, has a list of relocation assistance programs for people who are moving to places less hostile to trans folks. That's just one example, but there are in some places some financial assistance programs. Um, and then use what you have. So sometimes that means that we might use our health insurance to get, some or most of our care, knowing that that's going to take care of a chunk of what we need. And then we have to, maybe pay for one prescription out of pocket, and we can fundraise for that. Maybe it means, using, if you have it, if your job has, oh my gosh, what are they called? The employment helplines. Uh,
And oh, I'm blocking on it too. Sorry. I mean, this is my
and like I know someone in the chat knows what I'm talking about. Employment assistance programs, yes. Um, EAP, like sometimes they have like 4 free mental health sessions. And if you access that, you can say, what are you going to tell my employer before you gain any of it? But like maybe you can get 4 free sessions of like somewhere from mediocre to good therapy. Um, maybe you do sex work, maybe you sell things on Facebook Marketplace. Like it's it's not fair that money is a barrier, and we do what we need to do to get our needs met. Um, other barriers. Sorry, I just was like, why did I put this slide here? How was that blank? Um, another thing we're facing in dealing with like getting and accessing care is diversity, equity, and inclusion bans. So I have 2 examples of articles on this here. One from the Advocate recently, Florida, signed a law that could strip Florida of pride celebrations. And another about groups helping LGBTQ plus victims of violence could face a catastrophic loss of federal funding. Um, so we're seeing bans that aren't directly specifically about trans people or about funding are really interfering. Oh, I know why I put this here. Sorry. Um, are really interfering with how organizations exist. Um, Organizations are being pressured and have been pressured for the past over a year to remove any references to LGBTQ plus people, particularly trans folks, any references about immigration, harm reduction, things like that from their websites. And are cutting funding for those things. Organizations are also not able to apply for new funding, or new funding isn't being distributed. Positions are being cut, often trans-specific positions. So all of that impacts like what you can kind of find online. And so when we're thinking about, I need help with intimate partner violence, there may be less stuff available online right now about trans folks experiencing intimate partner violence because some places took it off their website. Um, okay, Caleb, what have we got in the chat? Or Michael? No, wait, not Michael. Um, okay, in the chat, ideas for getting support. Um, I work for social services org, and I always go to community partners and those with lived experience when at all possible. Also attending conferences, training events. Awesome. Yeah, asking other experts. As to creative meeting of needs, absolutely. As an aging old school punk, I'm all about helping people find alternative solutions when traditional avenues or the man fails them. Community care, mutual aid, DIY are so important. Absolutely. Thank you. Um, we're also sharing that, along with these bans, that governments have stopped collecting and reporting data about gender identity and sexual orientation, and deleting previously existing data. And another person shares going to family for help and support. All right, Michael, I see you. Let's do the second kind of scenario.
do it. And Emil, you're reading a lot. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm like trying to remember what I'm doing here. This is why I wrote a script for this, y'all. So you can write a script too. Scenario here is your primary care doctor is no longer allowed to provide gender affirming care. They are closing their practice. They recommend that you either sign up for an online clinic like Folks or Plume, move out of state, or you order your medicine online from overseas. So, same thing, Michael, general reactions.
So positive first is that this provider had three options, three ideas, which is more than some providers might share with people. They're all None of them are exactly practical. None of them are probably ideal. Um, but at least they're ideas and they're places that maybe get somebody's you know brain moving around like what can I do? And it might open a conversation with that provider before they leave. Because they may have other ideas. Or they may need to go to their friends and check out their community resources. But I mean, like what you were saying before, it's like, money is like what drives our access to care, and that's really unfortunate, and that should not have to be the way it is. I mean, a lot of folks can't afford to go to Folks or to Plume and pay $40 a month or $100 a month or whatever it is, plus medications out of pocket, plus like a lot of people can't afford that. So that's not a practical suggestion for a huge number of people. Most people can't just pick up and leave. Or how do you find something overseas? I mean, those are not practical things. So those are my first kind of impressions. What are your impressions, given that you wrote this?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wrote it in like, thank you so much to Folks in Plume and other telehealth things for
Yes.
existing. I like love a telehealth, love a trans affirming and like queer centric provider. And I don't know how people pay for that. Like it's it's just a lot of money. I mean, monthly fees plus individual doctor appointment fees plus prescriptions, things like that. Please, if you think those would work for them, look into it. Some they take some insurances. We have in the chat that, like Florida has outlawed telehealth for the initial trans healthcare appointment. I know at least Folks has a like setup where, you can go to Orlando for your first appointment, and then everything else is telehealth. So they're getting creative with what they can. But it's not going to work for everyone. Um, and my, I'm like, we need universal trans affirming healthcare for everybody. Healthcare should not be dependent on your job. It shouldn't be dependent on your money. Um, and people have done all of these options, and they have been helpful for various people. Um, so again, it's like both and of really thinking through what's necessary for you. I think other options are, you know, you, your provider may not know every other provider in the area. So if there is any sort of trans community where you are asking people who they go to, and it may not be the best, but figuring out what you can handle and what you need is sometimes what you have to do. I know, like it really, really sucks that sometimes we have to balance either like more expensive but feels really good to go to, or like I can afford it and I can get my medications and they misgender me. And like you shouldn't be misgendered. You shouldn't have to deal with that. And sometimes the reality is we deal with that in order to get our needs met. So it's okay. You're not less trans or like less of a good badass trans organizer radical if you go to a doctor that isn't always trans affirming.
And that's kind of what I was going to say too, that like sometimes we prioritize both based on kind of what we can tolerate, but also what our needs are. So like, gender affirming care, the type of gender affirming care that's like hormones, things that are related specifically to trans folks may not be the most important thing for somebody who lives with chronic disabilities. And, making sure that their diabetic care is taken care of, that their migraines are taken care of, like those things might be more important. So they might be willing to settle, really badly settle, for somebody who may not get the gender stuff as well because they really need to have that access to care. So it's kind of like, we shouldn't have to settle, but when we do, if we know what our priorities are, we can at least try to have some level of continuity of care while we try to find a more ideal solution.
Yeah. I think sometimes, and that's where like the debriefing, getting support afterwards, or having advocating for yourself, getting a friend, having social support can help too. It's taking it out of like healthcare, sometimes domestic violence agencies are like the people you have to go to get into certain programs or get, um, to get relocation assistance from the government. You may have to file that through a certain agency, and that it may be worth it to go to them, even though they they're not great at some things. So knowing that you're making that choice and having to balance that, how can you get the support and care you need so that it's not so that it does as little damage as possible, I guess.
And
Yeah.
part of that too, I think, is the creativity of like, maybe you don't want to get married, but maybe you are partnered with somebody and that partner has insurance. You know, is that something you want to pursue? Again, this is kind of like this is like the better, maybe the worst of the two evil. I don't know what it is. But what do we need to do and what feels comfortable to us so that we can access the care that we need? And maybe it is, swapping with friends. Is that legal? No, not really. But is that going to keep somebody alive? Is that going to keep somebody, feeling okay enough to keep on going in the world? Maybe. So yeah, I mean, like, how can we be creative, and as providers, how can we be not judgmental about those choices that somebody's making? Because we don't know why they're making those choices, and there's probably a really good reason for it. Yeah.
And I think that, yeah, that sharing with friends can be so great. And we don't have to stockpile in order to do that. Sometimes you just get your prescription filled a couple days early, and over time, you've got 10 Lexapro to spare, in case of emergency. Anything else with this one?
No, it's a great one. I'm gonna pop off again and let you finish up the rest of
Yeah.
the webinar.
Um, this is where I got lost earlier. Sorry about that, y'all. But so with all those DEI bans, we're seeing, and I saw someone in the chat say this too, that websites are taking down all of this information. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that services have ended. There are some places that are really LGBTQ affirming and inclusive, and that's not reflected in their online presence. So if we look for that, which I know that's the first thing I do is like Google trans affirming, whatever, whatever. Um, but if I can't find that, are there other ways to find that information? So again, asking other people in the community, calling that organization and asking them. And if that's stressful, see if somebody else can call and ask. And again, as Michael and I were just talking about, that harm reduction of like which goals feel most important to me, what can I tolerate, and what can I do to be less impacted by the things I have to put up with in order to get this need met. Um, and if people have additional strategies for, how they might find out if an organization is trans affirming, whether it's like a sexual assault agency or a therapist or something like that, please share in the chat, as we get to our last couple minutes. Another consideration that we might make is whether to disclose or not. So deciding to disclose whether you're trans doesn't change who you are, right? There's not like a right way to be trans. There's not a right way to tell people that we're trans, or a thing that you have to tell anybody. Um, it's okay to make difficult decisions in difficult circumstances. So I just don't want us to be, again, like make our lives easier. We don't need to be mad at ourselves for the crappy decisions we have to make when things are crappy. Um, there may be, you know, you may want everyone to know something, but decide that that's not what makes sense right now. You get to decide what aspects of your life you share. So that includes, your gender. It includes trauma experiences, substance use, medical history, anything else. Um, that's your story, and you don't have to tell everybody everything, and you can tell people what you want to. Um, in some situations, more information may help get you closer to the services and support you want, um, or it may not. Another way to get support is through mutual aid, which people mentioned in the chat. So there are a lot of, structured mutual aid groups that you can find often by, again, just searching for mutual aid plus wherever you live, or nearby big cities. But we also do mutual aid just by trading with people we know. Um, Asking a friend, asking a neighbor for something, um, sharing resources and services. Hey, I can give you a ride to do this. Could you do this thing for me? There's also lots of non-traditional ways to get cash. And another way that we share is by getting care outside of the United States. Um, if if you have connections, and knowledge about it, it may be going to another place or asking a friend who's traveling into the United States to share and bring some things with you that aren't as available here, um, maybe through online means. And if what you're getting, you know, through mail order, anything that's not like a licensed pharmacy, if you're getting medications, it is good to have some way to check that what you're receiving is actually what you intend it to be. And there's some information about how to do that, that's available out there. So just a note, and kind of the risk reduction is to consider what you're putting into your body, and if it's really what you think it is, especially if you get it from an unknown source. And in terms of harm reduction, that's kind of been a theme throughout this, is care isn't all or nothing. We often get what we can, where we can, as safely as we can. And that's okay. We don't need to judge ourselves for that. That might mean, using insurance for this, getting help from your friend for this. It might mean putting up with something annoying for this. Um, and don't use alone is a common harm reduction tip, but in addition to like how that's often used in terms of drug use, of having support, like we don't have to go through our lives and through our accessing care alone. So there's other people that we can bring in. People have mentioned, having, even if you have one family member who can be a support, maybe over time they can help introduce you to other people who they've found supportive. You can start to just slowly expand those networks so that we have more and more people on our corner and in our support. Um, and as we get to like our last 2 minutes, Michael put an evaluation link in the chat. It'll also show up when you close out of here. But we wanted to have time for any last comments, questions, or thoughts, stuff that we didn't cover you want to bring forward. As y'all put that in the chat, that's me. Feel free to email me for anything. Love to stay in touch and hear from folks. And then you can connect with Forge through our social media. We're on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, email, our next webinar, anything like that. I see a question: does verbal and emotional abuse count? Um, Absolutely. Yeah. Anytime that I mention intimate partner violence or sexual assault, like those things don't have to just be physical. They can be verbal or emotional. And verbal and emotional abuse and violence don't just get committed by intimate partners. So it may be family members, friends, acquaintances, anyone else who is committing those things. Um, yeah, they are really, really common. As someone else has shared in the chat, absolutely count as abuse. And anyone experiencing those has the right to get care and support just as much as anyone else. Right. Right. Thank you, everybody, so much for your time and energy today. We really appreciate y'all being here and being alive and being part of our community. If there's anything else, reach out. Happy to chat more about anything that came up today for you or support you need. And again, thank you for all that you do in this world. We'll see you next time. Take care.